Big Shaq proudly opens the community pool. Cameras flashing, neighbors cheering. But when the homeless black girl screams, "Don't get in the pool," the celebration stops cold. Her voice cuts deeper than any ribbon, unearthing a buried truth the town tried to forget. In that moment, Big Shaq isn't just unveiling a pool, he's standing at the edge of a lie. And once he learns what's under the surface, nothing will ever be the same. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun hung heavy in the sky like a spotlight, casting long shadows over a neighborhood that looked like it had been painted from a catalog. Neat hedges, crisp driveways, American flags gently swaying in well-behaved winds. The kind of place where everything smiled on the surface. The kind of place that said, "We're not like other places," but didn't say who exactly we was meant to be. Shaquille O'Neal eased his massive frame out of his black SUV, the sun glinting off the polished hood, as if even the metal recognized the man behind the wheel. Dressed casually, a gray shirt stretched across his chest, basketball shorts, and sneakers that barely contained his size 22 feet, he looked like he could still dunk if the world asked him to. But Shaq wasn't here to play, not today. This was the Everland Park Pool and Civic Center, a $1 million renovation he'd personally financed 2 summers ago, not because he needed goodwill points, but because he'd grown tired of seeing all the new public spaces pop up everywhere, except the neighborhoods that whispered, "Not for you," to people who looked like him. So he made one himself, and not in a black neighborhood, either, in the kind of white suburb where smiles stretched just a little too wide, and thank yous were dipped in something invisible. He stepped through the entrance, waving to a couple of staff members he didn't recognize. New hires, maybe, and took a deep breath. Chlorine hung in the air like memory. Laughter echoed across the water, kids splashing, mothers watching, phones filming. It looked exactly like what he wanted it to be: safe, shared, simple. But then he saw her. She was barely more than a shadow at first, half hidden behind the far fence, clinging to a patch of shade where the building's brick cast a hard line on the concrete. She wore an oversized hoodie even in the heat, the fabric grimy, sleeves chewed. Her knees were scraped, skin raw like she'd been falling down more often than walking forward. She had no shoes, no bag, just a threadbare blue blanket wrapped around one shoulder, dragging behind her like a forgotten promise. Shaq paused. Something in his chest twitched. He knew pain when it wore small hands and a quiet mouth. The girl wasn't moving. Not toward the water. Not away. Just watching. But not the way kids watched pools. Not with hunger or excitement. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, clung to the pool's edge like it was a cliff. And when Shaq took a few casual steps toward her, a warm smile on his face, a practiced calm in his body, she screamed. The sound tore the day in half. "Don't get in the pool." It wasn't a whimper. It wasn't begging. It was warning. That kind of scream doesn't come from imagination. It comes from memory. And it silenced the water. The laughter stopped mid-bounce. Every head turned. Mothers clutched towels. Lifeguards blinked. Even the breeze seemed to recoil, like the world had heard something it wasn't supposed to. Shaq froze. Not because he felt fear, but because the scream felt familiar in a way he couldn't name. Like something he'd once dreamed about but forgotten. The girl's chest rose and fell like she'd just run a mile, though her legs hadn't moved an inch. She looked at him like she knew him, not from television, not from basketball, but from something deeper. Recognition passed between them, but it wasn't about fame. It was about truth and pain. A white woman in a navy sun hat rushed toward the fence, her voice syrupy and sharp all at once. "Sweetheart, are you okay? You can't be back there." Shaq turned slightly, gently putting himself between the girl and the approaching woman, though he didn't touch either. The girl backed away, pressing herself against the bricks. Her hands were fists now. Her eyes never left the pool, not even for a second. The woman's expression shifted when she saw who was standing there. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Oh, Mr. O'Neal, I didn't realize." "You know her?" Shaq asked quietly, voice low enough to be kind, loud enough to be firm. The woman hesitated. "No, she just shows up sometimes. I think she's troubled." That word troubled landed heavy, like a gavel, like a curtain dropping. Shaq didn't reply. He looked back at the girl, still frozen, still staring. He turned to the lifeguard, a red-headed teenager with too many freckles and not enough authority. "Hey, Anyone talk to her? The kid shrugged, uneasy. She's not supposed to be here, sir. We called someone. Who? The community coordinator. Shaq felt it in his gut, the long American pause before someone calls the cops. He stepped toward the girl slowly. Didn't crouch, didn't extend his hand. Just let his presence fill the space without making it heavier. You're okay, he said gently. You're not in trouble. But the girl shook her head. Once, twice, then whispered. Not screamed, but whispered like a thread being pulled from fabric. You can't go in. That water ain't safe. Shaq blinked. He glanced at the pool. The same shimmering surface. Blue tiles, white concrete. Nothing wrong, nothing obvious. But suddenly, it didn't feel clean. It felt silent, too silent. A security guard in a bright yellow polo showed up at the entrance, walkie crackling. The girl heard it and vanished. One blur of motion behind the building, blanket trailing like smoke. Shaq started to move, but the guard raised a hand. Don't chase her. We've had complaints. This ain't her first time. Shaq didn't like the way he said this. Like the girl was a raccoon, not a human being. He looked at the pool again, then at the spot she'd disappeared. Something wasn't sitting right. He could feel it. Another lifeguard called out, Mr. O'Neal, want to come take a photo with the kids? Shaq gave a thumbs up, but didn't smile. Not yet. Not now. The sun kept shining. The water kept shimmering. But the air had changed. The laughter hadn't returned. And Shaq's mind wouldn't stop replaying her voice. Not the scream, but the whisper. That pool ain't safe. He'd built this place. Paid for every tile. Trusted the community. But today it didn't feel like his. Today something broke the picture-perfect frame. And whatever it was, he knew it started with her. That scream didn't come from fear. It came from a secret. And now that he'd heard it, he couldn't unhear it. Not now. Not ever. She hadn't slept the night before.
Not really.
Just rested her back against a rusted dumpster behind a shuttered laundromat, clutching a plastic grocery bag that held nothing useful anymore. Her blanket, once soft, and maybe pink, was now a battered ghost of fabric, barely holding together. She wrapped it tighter around her shoulders. As the sun rose, the early heat already starting to crawl through the city's corners. Her name didn't matter, not to anyone here. Not to the ones who passed her on sidewalks. Not to the ones who looked and looked away. People like her, small, dark-skinned, barefoot and trembling, weren't seen. They were scanned, dismissed, and forgotten. But today she was going somewhere she wasn't supposed to go. Her feet were blistered, soles like raw paper, but she kept walking, 4 blocks from where the back alley ended, through a small dog park where the stairs hardened, down a sidewalk lined with hibiscus bushes and ring cameras. The blanket dragged behind her like a trail of warnings, but she didn't let go. It was the last thing she had from before. She stopped when she saw the blue of the pool peeking between the slats of a tall fence. Even from here, she could feel it. The cold shine of that place, the lies it held under every ripple. That pool looked beautiful to people who didn't know what it was. That's how danger works. Sometimes, dressed in light, surrounded by cheer, humming like a lullaby. She waited by the side gate, just outside the shadow of a Welcome to Everlyn Park pool sign, bold and cheery in red and teal. Her eyes locked on the water, unmoving, staring hard like if she looked long enough she could burn a hole through it. She wasn't thinking of swimming. She wasn't thinking of anything except stopping someone. Anyone. Because the last time, no one listened. It had happened late last summer. Not here, not exactly, but close enough to smell the same chlorine. Another pool, another community, one she had wandered near because of the music, because of the smell of hot dogs and sunscreen, because for just a second, it reminded her of being little, back when her mother's voice still had songs in it. She had seen him, the boy maybe a year older than her, standing at the edge, laughing with someone, daring himself to dive. But something had gone wrong. Too quick, too quiet. She saw it. She saw all of it. The way the lifeguard hesitated. The way the adults didn't notice. The way the water folded around him like it had decided it was hungry that day. She saw how fast silence could spread when no one wanted the story to be ugly. They said he slipped. That's what the report said. That's what the local news carried. And then the footage disappeared. And then the boy's name faded off. Lips like it had been a smudge to begin with. But she knew what happened. He didn't slip. He was pushed. Not with hands. Not directly. but pushed by presence, by the way they cornered him, mocked him, told him he couldn't swim like them, told him the water was clean until he got in it. She'd tried to tell someone after. A woman at a shelter. A man behind a counter at a store. No one wanted that version of the story. And soon, no one wanted her. That's how she ended up drifting. Couch to street, shelter to sidewalk, until she ended up in this neighborhood. She hadn't meant to stay, but when she saw the new community pool, sparkling and wide, full of sunburnt children and men with camera phones, something in her locked up. She remembered how the water had looked the same before, how it always looked clean until it didn't. So she watched, day after day, from that patch behind the fence, watching and waiting, not sure for what, until he showed up. Shaquille O'Neal didn't look real at first. He was too big, too calm, too soft around the edges. Not weak, just open in a way grown men, especially ones built like walls, weren't usually allowed to be. She'd seen his face before, sure, on old YouTube clips, basketball highlights she watched when shelter Wi-Fi reached her phone. But seeing him here, in the daylight, moving toward the pool with that slow, steady pace, something about it felt wrong, not because of him but because of what the pool had done before. To others like him, bigger boys, smaller ones. Didn't matter the size, the water didn't care. She didn't think. Her feet moved without asking her first. And then her voice did the same. "Don't get in the pool!" It came out louder than she thought she could speak. For someone who spent most of her life being ignored, it startled even her. It cracked open something in the day, split the piece in half like a bone being snapped. He froze, not like the others had. Not with fear or fake concern. He froze like someone who heard something else under the words. Not just warning, truth. For the first time, someone looked at her not like a problem, but like a signal. The crowd was turning now. She could feel the stares like needles. That woman in the sun hat was back. The security guy with the walkie-talkie too. She knew what came next. Words like trespassing, disturbance, mental health hold. The way people use order to drown out shame. She wanted to run but didn't. Not yet. Because he was still looking. Not just at her, through her. Like he knew there was more to hear. And maybe, just maybe, he was someone who'd finally stay long enough to hear it. But when the yellow-shirted guard showed up and called in backup, her instincts kicked in. She couldn't risk it. Not again. Last time she got pulled in, it took her 3 weeks to get back out. They called it temporary care. But there was nothing temporary about the way some places made you forget what your name felt like. So she backed away. One step, then another. Blanket dragging, eyes still locked on the man who hadn't moved. The edge of the building gave her a pocket to vanish into. She knew the layout now, had learned where the cameras didn't reach, where the alley behind the pump shed opened up into the woods. But she paused one last time before ducking out of sight. Because he was still there. Still standing. And she knew, this wasn't the end. She hadn't screamed to stop a swim. She'd screamed to start a reckoning. And something told her deep in her bones that he had heard exactly what she meant. Not just don't get in the pool, but don't trust the water they say is clean. Because some pools drown more than bodies. They drown truths. And someone needed to remember that. Shaq didn't move for a long time after the scream settled into silence. The kind of silence that didn't soothe. It stung. The kind that stayed too long. The pool rippled slightly, harmless on the surface. But the sound of that girl's voice still echoed in his ears like it had been stitched there. He didn't step in the water. Not because he believed her. Not yet. But because something in her eyes didn't allow him to ignore her. There were eyes you glanced past. Then there were eyes that made you remember things you thought you'd buried. Hers were the second kind. Eyes full of memory. Yes, but not the soft kind. Fire was in them. Not wildfire. Controlled fire. Pain harnessed into warning. A survival scream, not a tantrum. He looked around. The staff was trying to reclaim the atmosphere. The music got a little louder. A few nervous chuckles came from the loungers. But the illusion was cracked. The perfect pool. The perfect neighborhood. Someone had dragged real life into it like mud on white carpet, and everyone wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. Shaq slowly moved toward the edge of the water. But instead of stepping in, he knelt beside it. Knees creaked, not from age, but from a weight bigger than him. His eyes scanned the pool, the long tiles, the metallic glint at the bottom, the faint shimmer of a reflection. But his thoughts weren't here. They were back. In Newark. In the 1980s. In the places his mother never let him go. Lucille O'Neal didn't fear water. She feared history. She had seen too many boys jump into lakes they weren't allowed in, and not come back. She had walked him past pools surrounded by chain-link fences, and told him, "They'll say it's for safety, baby, but sometimes fences ain't to keep you safe, they're to keep you out." He remembered her warnings. About parks that welcomed your money, but not your presence. About smiles that said, "Have a good day," while their eyes said, "Don't stay too long." He'd lived through that. Felt it tighten around his success like a rope pretending to be ribbon. And now this girl, this barefoot child with a torn blanket and unshakable eyes, had shown up in his pool, the one he'd funded, designed, opened with local press and a speech about unity, and she'd screamed like the water itself was cursed. He kept kneeling, hand resting gently on his thigh, not reaching for the water, not reaching for answers, just holding space. Then a memory hit him, one he hadn't unpacked in years. He'd been 10. A pool party. Some cousin's apartment complex outside Jacksonville. White neighborhood. His mother had let him go only because she'd called 3 times to confirm there'd be lifeguards. He remembered climbing the diving board. Remembered hearing a boy behind him mutter something, quiet but sharp, that he can't even swim. Thought y'all weren't built for water. He didn't respond. He just dove. Landed wrong. Smacked the water hard. Lost breath. Kicked up. But something in him froze when he came up. Not from injury. From realization. He was the only black kid in that pool. Every set of eyes on him. Not cheering. Just watching. Studying. Lucille pulled him out early that day. Drove home quiet. Then she said, "They'll let you swim, baby. But they'll never let you feel safe in the water." Now here he was. Kneeling beside a pool he helped build. With his own money. His own legacy. And feeling the same weight pressing down. His gaze drifted across the pool's far wall. A new mural had been painted there. Kids of all races, cartoonish and happy, jumping into blue waves, their arms outstretched. He remembered signing off on that design. Symbolic, the artist had said. Inclusive. But now that mural looked like a lie told to make people stop asking questions. The girl's scream had pulled a thread, and his instincts were tugging it now. Something wasn't right. Not about her fear. That was real. But about this place. The way no one had gone after her. The way security reacted like this was routine. The way the staff wanted everything to go back to normal so fast. That kind of panic doesn't come from seeing a pool. It comes from what happened in one. Shaq slowly stood, brushing his knees. He caught the lifeguard's eye, the freckled teenager again, and motioned him over. The kid hesitated, then shuffled close. "You ever seen that girl before?" Shaq asked, his tone casual, but waited. The kid nodded too fast. "Yeah, she shows up sometimes. Usually runs off. We were told not to engage." "By who?" "I think Mr. Wiley. He runs operations now. Said she's mentally unstable. Or something." Shaq didn't like the way he said it. The words were rehearsed, like something memorized, not experienced. He nodded, waved the kid off, then turned back to the water. It looked normal. It always did. But now the image didn't hold. Because fire remembers where it burned. And her eyes? They'd seen the flames before anyone else had smelled smoke. The girl hadn't warned him because she was scared of pools. She warned him because she'd seen what happens when people pretend nothing ever happens. Because someone had drowned, metaphorically or literally. And no one wanted the headline. And somewhere along the way, that girl became the last witness. But Shaq wasn't going to swim in silence. Not anymore. Shaq stood there longer than anyone else did. Not because he didn't know how to walk away. He just couldn't. Something inside him had caught, like the tooth of a zipper stuck in its own fabric. He'd been to hundreds of neighborhoods, shook hands with governors, signed autographs on streets that weren't made for his size. But this moment at the edge of a pool he'd paid for, it felt like standing on the edge of something colder than water. Something unspoken, but loud. He scanned the area again. Really looked this time. It wasn't what anyone said. It was what they didn't say. 2 white men, both in golf polos and boat shoes, stood just off the shaded bench circle, arms crossed, eyes tracking him like a loose shopping cart. A mother adjusting her daughter's sun visor leaned slightly toward her friend, murmuring under breath, eyes flitting toward him like she was studying a puzzle she hadn't expected to find in the middle of her predictable Saturday. Even the teenagers had gone quieter, the kind of quiet that pretends it's not watching you, but everyone is. Shaq's frame didn't shrink, but his spirit folded slightly. He felt it, that old thing, that deep, quiet suspicion that lives under smiles in neighborhoods like this. That feeling of what's he doing here, dressed up as a welcome wave. He'd been rich a long time, famous even longer, but no amount of wealth had ever given him immunity from being the anomaly in a white space. This neighborhood, this pool, this whole presentation of calm, it welcomed his money, his PR speeches, his ribbon cuttings. But the second something unplanned showed up, everything shifted. Security tightened like a reflex. 2 guards by the gate began pacing, radios clipped to their shoulders, chirping out short codes and abbreviations. They weren't making a scene, not really. That would be too honest. Instead, they acted like nothing was wrong, but their footsteps moved closer to where the girl had vanished. Shaq caught one of them whispering into a mic. "Yeah, she's back. Might need to escort this one out today. Again." Again. That word cracked something open. This wasn't the first time. She'd been here, multiple times. And every time, instead of asking why, they'd escorted her out like an inconvenience. A smudge on their comfort. Shaq turned and walked slowly toward the shade line, where a row of benches sat just far enough from the pool to feel detached. An older man with wire-rimmed sunglasses was there, sipping from a thermos that didn't belong to coffee. He glanced up. "Mr. O'Neal," he said with a tone that tried to sound casual but didn't know how. "Didn't expect to see you here again." Shaq didn't smile. "It's my pool." The man smirked. Of course. We all appreciate the, contribution. Really elevated the place." Shaq's eyes didn't leave his. "Who's she?" The man paused. "You mean the girl?" "Nobody. Homeless. Probably disturbed. She's been drifting through for weeks. We've tried helping, offered food once, but she's, not receptive." "Not receptive?" Shaq repeated. The man shrugged. "Look, I get it. You've got a big heart. I respect that. But we're trying to keep the kids safe. Families. This place has a vibe, you know." No, he didn't. Because what this man called a vibe was really a boundary. One drawn in silence. Not painted on streets. Not posted on signs. But real. He'd felt it his whole life. In schools. In gyms. In high-end restaurants, where the hostess looked twice at his reservation. The invisible line that said, "You can be here, but don't bring all of you." The girl had crossed that line. Just by showing up. Just by screaming what no one else wanted to hear. And now she was a threat. Not because she had done anything violent. She hadn't even touched anyone. But because she made them uncomfortable. And in places like this, discomfort was treated like danger. Shaq walked back toward the entrance, heart ticking louder now. He spotted one of the guards, the same one from earlier, speaking into his earpiece again. "She ran behind the pump house. Should be easy to detain. She's small." Detain. Shaq's hands curled into fists. Not for violence, but from fury. That they'd use a word like detain for a barefoot child who screamed to save someone. That they hadn't even asked why she screamed. That they just wanted her gone so the day could return to its scheduled programming. He stepped in front of the guard. "Don't touch her." The guard blinked. "Sir?" Shaq didn't repeat himself. The man straightened. "With all due respect, she's not allowed on the property." Shaq's voice dropped a notch. "She's not a trespasser. She's a witness." That made the guard falter. "To what?" "That's what I'm gonna find out. But until then, nobody lays a hand on her. That clear?" The man looked like he wanted to push back, but then his radio buzzed again. This time with a different voice. One that said, "Shaquille O'Neal is interfering. We need clearance to continue." Shaq turned and walked toward the small brick building behind the pool. The pump house. Not fast. Not loud. But with a certainty that made people stop watching and start feeling something shift. Behind the shed, there was a rustling. Then a stillness. She was there. The blanket was wrapped tighter now, as if she knew what was coming. Her feet were curled beneath her body like she was trying to disappear. Her face wasn't scared. It was resigned. He sat down in the grass across from her. No words for a moment. Just the sound of the summer air, heavy and wet. "I didn't come to take you away," he said finally. She didn't respond. "I came to listen." Still nothing. But her shoulders dropped. Just a bit. That was enough. Behind them, a new noise. A car pulling into the lot. Black SUV. City emblem on the side. The girl's eyes tightened. Shaq didn't turn. Who is it? Wiley, she whispered. That was the name the lifeguard mentioned. Wiley stepped out of the SUV, with the ease of someone used to smiling at cameras and dodging real questions. He walked toward them, flanked by two pool staffers. Mr. O'Neal, he called. Cheerful. Didn't know you were back in town. Shaq didn't rise. You know this girl? Wiley didn't answer directly. She's been disruptive before. We've had to remove her, for her safety and ours. Shaq looked up now. She told me someone drowned. Last year. A boy. Right here. Wiley blinked. That true? There was an incident. A tragedy, yes, but cleared. All documented. Name? Excuse me? The boy's name. Wiley shifted slightly. That's not something we typically discuss with the public. Confidentiality. Shaq stood. I'm not the public. Silent. Wiley's smile faltered. With respect, we appreciate your support of the center. Truly. But this situation is being handled. You don't need to involve yourself further. Shaq turned fully now. Stared him down. I am involved. Behind him. The girl rose too. Still holding the blanket. But straighter now. She hadn't been seen in days. But now she was heard. The invisible line that separated comfort from conscience had been crossed. And Shaq wasn't going back. Long before cameras followed his steps, or strangers wore his jersey in every city he landed. Shaq was just a tall, quiet boy, with big feet and a mother who taught him how to see things people didn't talk about. Newark wasn't easy, not then. It had corners where the streetlights flickered, and hope stayed inside after sundown. But Shaq never feared the dark. Lucille O'Neal had raised him with enough light to find his way, no matter where he stood. She didn't speak often in long sermons, but when she did, her words stayed. They weren't polished or poetic, but they clung to the bones. Like the time she handed him a glass of water, when he was maybe 11, sweaty from schoolyard ball, and said, "You see how clean that looks? Don't mean it is. Still water's the kind that hides what it done." Swallowed. He didn't get it then. Not really. He nodded, drank, wiped his mouth, and ran back outside. But the sentence stuck, curled up in his ribs somewhere. Years later, it returned every time something looked too perfect, too silent, too much like a surface pretending to be deep. Every time he walked into a room and felt the hush follow. Every time he stepped on a stage and saw the flash of smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Still water. That's what Lucille called it. Not because it was peaceful, but because it was hiding. She knew what silence covered. She'd grown up in it. Alabama heat, a town where you never walked alone, and never spoke first. Lucille had watched cousins vanish into police reports, had scrubbed floors for women who called her dear, with a face that cracked when she left the room. And she learned fast. In places where the water didn't move, something underneath always did. So she taught her son to listen, not just to words, but to temperature, to the way a room shifted when he entered, to the tone behind compliments, to the rules that changed, depending on who was asking. Shaq remembered one morning in particular. He was 14. A friend had invited him to a members-only country club, where they swore it didn't matter that he wasn't a member, said the pool was the best in the county, that it would be cool to sneak in. Lucille didn't yell. She just looked at him and said, "Don't let welcome fool you if they ain't the ones who built the door." He didn't go. And that afternoon, when his friends got escorted out by staff and lectured by local police, he understood. Now decades later, standing beside a public pool that bore his name on a brass plaque, that voice returned, not in full sentences, just in rhythm, in knowing, in the way his skin felt tight on his arms when he looked at the water and remembered the girl's eyes. He could almost hear Lucille's breath beside him, slow and deep, laced with that calm black maternal fire that said, "Do not let the world shape your silence." She wouldn't have screamed like the girl had. No, Lucille didn't scream. She'd stare, she'd wait, then she'd speak one sentence that cut cleaner than noise. Shaq could feel her now. "The way you feel heat without looking at the flame," her voice said. "If that girl ain't safe enough to speak here, you never were either. You just bought a bigger towel." And that's when it hit him. He'd tried to buy peace. He thought funding this place, a pool in a white neighborhood, a symbol of bridging gaps, of rebuilding, would mean something more permanent. But the truth was, he hadn't dismantled the system. He just decorated it, given it shade umbrellas and new tiles, and a snack bar. But the rules underneath hadn't shifted. Because the second a barefoot black girl screamed truth into the air, the whole place treated her like a glitch in the matrix. Lucille's voice wasn't judgmental. It was grounding. She wasn't disappointed in him. She reminded him of who he was before the suits, before the stages, before the endorsements. A boy who knew how to read a room without anyone teaching him. A boy who learned the difference between quiet and peace. Shaq's shoulders tightened, but not in anger. In decision. He couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not when someone younger, smaller, and forgotten had done the one thing so few dared. Told the truth out loud in a place built on silence. Still water covers sins, and now he had to stir it. The air around the pool thickened just a bit. Not enough to notice if you were distracted by sunscreen or the sound of children's laughter, but Shaq felt it. It was the change in temperature before a front moves in. The atmosphere didn't cool, it tightened. Everything felt rehearsed again. Too smoothed out. Like everyone had fallen back into their just a normal day roles. But he hadn't. From the far side of the pool deck, he saw him. A pressed white polo shirt, khaki slacks, aviator sunglasses tucked into the collar, and a clipboard under one arm like a badge of quiet authority. Deacon Wiley. The man who ran the day-to-day operations of the Everland Park Civic Center. The same name the lifeguards had mumbled earlier. He walked with the self-assurance of someone who never got questioned, whose meetings always ended early, who smiled at everyone but truly listened to no one. Shaq didn't need to shake his hand to know who he was. He'd met dozens of men like him before. The kind who knew how to use respect as a tool, or a threat. Wiley made his way over with a practiced casualness, pausing to give small nods to staff, complimenting a child's dive form, letting the presence of being in control wrap around him like cologne. Then, finally, he reached Shaq, all polished charm and business smile precision. "Mr. O'Neal," Wiley said warmly, extending his hand. "It's good to finally meet you in person. We've spoken over email, but your schedule's usually a bit broader than Everland, huh?" Shaq shook the hand but said nothing. "I wanted to personally thank you for your generous donation," Wiley continued. "This place wouldn't be what it is today without you. Truly, you've created something beautiful here." Shaq looked around slowly, then locked eyes with him. "Is it beautiful if it's built on silence?" Wiley blinked. The smile didn't drop. Not yet. But the edges tightened, like the mask knew it was under threat. "Pardon me. That girl," Shaq said calmly. "The one who screamed. You've seen her before." Wiley's gaze shifted, just for a second, toward the pump house, then back. "Yes. Well, unfortunately she's troubled. She's shown up a few times. Scared some of the families. Disrupted the environment we've worked hard to create. She didn't scream because she wanted attention. She screamed because she remembers something." Wiley's jaw moved like he wanted to respond, but was still deciding which version of the story to tell. That second of delay gave Shaq everything he needed. "Was she here the day that boy drowned?" Shaq asked flatly. Wiley's mask slipped, barely. A flicker in the eyes, a twitch near the temple. Then it was gone, replaced by managerial concern. "That situation was investigated thoroughly. The boy's family received proper support. It was an accident, Mr. O'Neal. A tragic one, yes. But ultimately, then why does she look at that pool like it's a coffin?" Wiley's smile dissolved now. Not completely, just enough to see the tension hiding beneath the niceties. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but you're a respected figure. You don't want to get caught up in the wrong kind of press. People know your name, your brand. If something goes sideways, they'll forget all the good you did here, and only focus on the noise." Shaq tilted his head, studying him. "Noise?" he repeated. "I'm saying, let the community handle this. Let us maintain order. The girl's been warned before. If she's putting herself or others at risk, there are procedures. Procedures like escorting her out every time she tells the truth." Wiley's lips pressed together. No more smiles now. "With all due respect, Mr. O'Neal, I'm not sure what you think is happening here, but there's no conspiracy, no buried secrets, just a community trying to keep its families safe." Shaq took a step closer, towering over him, not with threat, but with truth. "You ever ask her what she saw? She's not stable. Her stories shift. She's been approached by staff and even social workers. Her stories don't shift. Yours do." There was a beat of silence that clung between them. Then, as if summoned by the tension, the girl reappeared, slowly, quietly, from behind the structure, eyes wide, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She didn't speak at first, just stared, at the water, at Wiley, then at Shaq. Wiley turned toward her. His posture stiffened. "Sweetheart, this area is restricted. You shouldn't be here." She didn't move. But something in her face hardened. And then, softly, so soft it nearly drowned under the sound of pool filters humming, she spoke. It wasn't an accident. Shaq's heart thudded once, loud and clear. Wiley's face flickered.
"What did you say?" he asked.
"I saw it." They laughed. They told him he was dirty, that he'd make the water black. He got pushed in. He didn't know how to swim. Nobody helped. Wiley stepped forward. "That's not true. That's enough." But the girl didn't stop. Her voice rose. Still steady. Still firm. "You told me to shut up. Said I was making trouble. Said nobody wanted to hear fairy tales. But I saw it. I saw you." Wiley's face turned to stone. Shaq looked from one to the other. Then back at Wiley. "You were here. I wasn't involved. But you knew." Wiley's voice sharpened. "What do you want me to say? That a boy got pushed into the water? That kids bullied him because he was black and poor and didn't have swim trunks from Target? That the lifeguard froze because he was afraid of making a scene? That the mother was hushed with money and the witnesses were told to move on? You think this place survives if that story goes public?" There it was. Not yelled. Not whispered. Just stated like fact. Shaq didn't move. Didn't speak. He didn't need to. Wiley had spoken more truth in 1 minute than he'd probably allowed himself to admit in months. The girl's chin lifted. Eyes on Wiley now. Not afraid. Not defiant. Just present. A witness no longer hiding. "You told me I was lying," she said. "But you were scared I was right." Wiley's hand tightened around his clipboard. The pool deck behind them remained oblivious. Still playing its scene. Kids laughing. Moms chatting. The American illusion humming along. But in that small circle between a girl with fire in her voice, a man who finally admitted silence, and a giant who now knew what he was fighting, everything changed. Respectability had worn a crisp white polo and clipboard. But truth? It showed up barefoot, carrying a torn blanket, and refused to be quiet. Shaq didn't sleep that night. Back at the modest Atlanta property he kept away from the cameras, he sat alone in his study, the glow of a muted TV flickering on the far wall but offering no comfort. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Media outlets chasing a quote, Foundation board members checking on optics, Wiley's office leaving the kind of voicemail that sounded polished enough to be harmless, but loaded with a warning. None of it moved him. Instead, he stared at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking over the search bar. He typed slowly, intentionally. The name, the neighborhood, the date. A year ago, to the week, and there it was, or rather what wasn't. A local story buried deep under barbecue ads and summer camp flyers. 3 sentences long. Tragic loss, 14-year-old Darnell Harris drowned at Everland Park Pool. Officials call it an unfortunate accident. Lifeguards and bystanders were unable to respond in time.
That was it.
No picture. No follow-up. No mention of parents. No memorial. Shaq leaned back, his shoulders heavy. The name Darnell stuck to his mind like wet paper. Something about it sounded too real to be fictionalized. So he did what men like him, with access and weight, rarely do. He used his network not to protect himself, but to dig. He called a journalist he trusted from his playing days. A lawyer who once helped him start his youth camps. A retired civil rights investigator, whose grandkids had attended one of Shaq's basketball clinics. And slowly, pieces surfaced. The boy had been from the other side of the freeway, a side they called in transition. But everybody knew, meant forgotten. Darnell had walked with a group of friends to the newly opened Everland Park Pool on its second weekend. The staff had welcomed them, but carefully, eyes watching too close, tones just a little off. Witnesses, mostly children, recalled some white boys making jokes, calling Darnell muddy, telling him, "Go rinse off in that water before you infect it." Some dared him to jump. One said, "Prove you belong." There was laughter, then a splash. But Darnell couldn't swim. The lifeguard, 17, undertrained, unsure, didn't move fast enough. By the time he did, it was too late. Darnell's body was pulled out, pale and limp. CPR was attempted. It didn't work. But what happened after was the real story. One of the mothers, an off-duty city administrator, made a call. not 911, the mayor's office. Within an hour, a community outreach rep showed up. The families were corralled, reassured, told not to worry. Don't let this become a racial issue, one parent remembered being told. Another said her daughter, who saw Darnell get pushed, was strongly encouraged to stay quiet so the community wouldn't be ripped apart by division. A week later, there was a closed-door settlement with Darnell's aunt, who had legal guardianship. She moved out of the state 3 days after the check cleared. That was the cleanup. Shaq stared at the screen. His jaw clenched. The girl, the one with the blanket and scream, had witnessed all of it. The laughter, the shoving, the silence afterward. She had seen the system flick the switch from chaos to calm, had watched grown men and women smother the truth beneath paperwork and community PR. And she had carried it. Alone. You printed out everything. The scanned emails, the faded copy of the settlement agreement, the name of the lifeguard, who had since transferred schools and declined interviews. He put it all into a folder and labeled it with a single word in red. Sharpie, taken. Because that's what it was. Not just a drowning. Something was taken. A life, yes, but also trust, a child's safety, a community's innocence. And now, they had the nerve to pretend it never happened. They painted murals and installed new vending machines, held inclusive family day with balloons and giveaways, all to cover up the rot. He stood up and walked to the window. The night was still. Too still. Lucille's words came back. Still water hides what it swallowed. Shaq turned from the window and looked at the folder on the desk. He thought about how many people knew, how many chose comfort over confrontation, how easy it would be to let this disappear again, to let the story fade under a press release. He could walk away, quietly, keep his endorsements, protect his foundation, let the community heal by forgetting. But he couldn't unsee what he'd seen, couldn't unhear that girl's scream, couldn't forget that Darnell had been pushed by more than kids. He'd been pushed by permission. Permission handed out by every adult who looked away. Shaq sat back down, pulled out his phone, and started recording. No script, no team, just him. His face, weary but grounded, filled the screen. I'm not here to talk about basketball, he began. I'm here to talk about a boy who drowned at a pool I helped build, and a system that drowned the truth right after. He paused, swallowed, continued. A girl screamed at me. She told me not to get in the water, that it wasn't safe. And I believed her, because she wasn't screaming out of fear. She was screaming out of memory. He lifted the folder. This is what was buried. But it's out now, and I won't let it go back under. He posted the video. No hashtags, no campaign, just a truth. Within minutes, his phone lit up like a fuse. Messages from reporters. A board member from his foundation, pleading to discuss the tone. A civil rights group requesting an interview. And then, a message from the girl. Just 2 words. You heard. Shaq looked at the screen, heart heavy.
Yes.
He heard, but hearing wasn't enough. Not anymore. It started with a phone call Shaq wasn't supposed to get. The voice on the other end was hushed, rushed, familiar with the sound of rooms that listen even when no one's in them. A receptionist from city services, someone who'd helped coordinate a youth basketball drive once, someone with a quiet conscience and too many secrets. She's in custody, the voice whispered. They picked her up early this morning behind the pool, said it was for her safety. Shaq gripped the armrest of his chair. The word custody scraped across his skin. Not detention, not protection, custody. It sounded like care but tasted like confinement. Where? He asked. Juvie holding downtown. But unofficial. There's no paperwork yet. They're calling it temporary. He ended the call and stood up slowly. The tension in his spine not from age but from knowing. He'd seen how systems wrapped themselves in kind language before locking doors. Safety, protection, concern. Words like gauze. Soft enough to suggest care, tight enough to cut off circulation. By the time he reached the intake center, 3 floors underground in a building that hadn't seen natural light in decades, the temperature felt colder than it should have been for Georgia. The lobby was empty except for one officer behind bulletproof glass, and a faded TV playing local news with subtitles flickering across the bottom. He gave his name, stated his reason. The officer looked up, eyebrows raised. You here for the girl? I'm here to see her. The man's face didn't shift. Not possible. She's under observation. What's the charge? No charge. Welfare custody. Protective hold. Standard protocol when minors are considered at risk. Shaq pressed both palms on the glass. Protective from who? She's been known to create public disturbances. Loud. Unpredictable. She disrupted a city facility. Screamed at children. Security footage backs it. She told the truth. The officer's tone stiffened. Sir, I can't let you see her. Shaq stepped back, stared at the scuffed tiles beneath his feet. The same ones that had probably echoed with the footsteps of kids who had no one come for them. No celebrities, no headlines, no names anyone remembered after the ink dried. Is she okay? He asked. She's been fed. Has a cot. We gave her a change of clothes. He didn't ask about comfort. Didn't ask if she was scared. He knew the answer. This wasn't about safety. It was about removal. The same way you clean a cracked tile. Not by fixing the foundation, but by scraping away the blemish. Back in his SUV, Shaq stared at the steering wheel. His fists clenched and released without touching it. The windows fogged with his breath as his mind spiraled, not from rage, but from helplessness. He'd been on courts in front of 20,000 screaming fans. Under the weight of expectations, injuries, pressure, he'd faced business giants, financial storms, public takedowns. But this was different. This was what it felt like when the system put up walls invisible to the public, but unbreakable to even the powerful. When even a giant's voice echoes back hollow. He called the mayor's office. Got sent to voicemail. He called the community board rep, who'd once paraded him through City Hall. This is a delicate situation, Shaquille. The voice said, smooth with spin. We have to consider all narratives. She's a minor. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. Is she safe? She's being handled. That word handled cut deeper than silence. He hung up. Next he called a lawyer. Not one on retainer, but one who fought for kids nobody claimed. A woman who didn't wear makeup on camera and didn't soften her voice for comfort. She listened, then sighed. They're trying to pacify you, Shaq. If they know you're watching, they'll stretch the process long enough for attention to die down. What do I do? Public doesn't move systems. Pressure does. But they'll dress it like sympathy. Say she needs help, that she's unstable. You make noise, they'll frame you as interfering with care. Happens every week. Shaq leaned back in the driver's seat. The engine still running, but the world around him felt like it was stalling. Sympathy. That was the word they used when they didn't want to say containment. It looked like kindness, but it smelled like bleach. Sterilizing truth so no one had to be uncomfortable. They had taken the girl, not with handcuffs, not with sirens, but with policy. With clipboards, with paperwork that said placement pending, while real decisions got made in rooms she'd never see. She screamed once, one scream, and now they were bleaching her out of the picture. Shaq pulled over in front of a playground near the Civic Center, watched as kids ran across mulch, voices full of joy they hadn't learned to second-guess yet. And then he saw a mural, one he hadn't noticed before, painted on the side of a rec room wall, diverse kids holding hands, smiling under a rainbow. He stared at it, because that's what America liked to do. Paint peace, display harmony, promote diversity in brochures, while detaining Black truth under protective custody. The mural had no Darnell on it, no screaming girl, no blanketed child at the edge of a pool, who remembered what the brochures left out. He took out his phone and opened the same video app, started another recording. Y'all called it sympathy. Said she needed help. But nobody helped her when she saw the truth. Nobody helped her when she told it. Nobody helped Darnell either. Sympathy ain't help, if it comes with chains. He looked directly into the camera. You locked her up for making you uncomfortable. But she didn't need a cell. She needed someone to believe her. He ended the recording. As it uploaded, a memory flashed. Young Shaq, age 10, watching his mother argue with a school principal who wanted to put him in a special needs class because he didn't talk much. Lucille didn't smile, didn't raise her voice. She looked the man in the eye and said, maybe he ain't quiet. Maybe he just don't like how y'all listen. Now Shaq knew exactly what she meant. Because the girl hadn't been screaming to be saved. She was screaming because no one listened when she whispered. And now they were silencing her again. This time, politely. With sympathy that looked like a hand outstretched. And felt like a caller. The house was quiet when he walked in. Not the kind of quiet that welcomed rest, but the kind that waited. The lights in the kitchen were low, humming soft yellow against the marble counters. No music, no television, just the hush of a home holding its breath. Shaq closed the door gently behind him, kicked off his shoes with the weight of a man carrying something too big for his frame, and moved through the hall like he was passing through a memory. Shawnee was sitting in the living room, not lounging, not scrolling her phone, just sitting back straight, eyes forward, like she'd been there a while. She wore one of his old college hoodies, and her expression was calm, but not soft. She didn't raise her voice when she spoke. "You look like you've been fighting ghosts again." Shaq exhaled and lowered himself into the chair across from her. "Feels like I'm trying to argue with walls." Shawnee tilted her head, studying him. "It's more than that, girl, isn't it?" He didn't answer right away. The truth was sitting too close to the surface. He didn't need time to think. He needed space to breathe. "She's in custody," he said finally. "Protective hold. They're calling it concern, but it's control." Shawnee sighed, not surprised. "They always say it's for safety, as if our safety has ever been their priority." Shaq leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "I keep replaying it in my head. That scream. The way she looked at me like I was supposed to do something. Like I was the last person who could stop whatever's coming." Shawnee nodded slowly. "Maybe you are. But baby, you can't fix everything." He looked up at her. Her tone wasn't dismissive. It was scared. "I'm not trying to fix everything," he said. "I'm trying to stop them from burying this. Again." "But the system's not broken, Shaq," she said softly. "It was built this way, to drown the noise, to package pain and call it protocol. You think showing the truth is enough? You think one video makes them care? They don't want to see her, or him, or you, standing in the middle of it." He sat back, the weight pressing into his shoulders again. "Then what's the point of all this? The speeches, the donations, the centers named after dreams? What's it all for if when it counts they lock up a child for being inconvenient?" Shawnee stood and walked toward the fireplace mantel, resting her hand on a framed photo. One of Lucille holding Shaq when he was barely 3, his feet already too big for the baby shoes. "She told me once," Shawnee began, "back when we were just dating, that she almost drowned once." Shaq looked up. "Mom? She didn't tell you?" He shook his head, brow tightening. "She was 15. Back in Newark. Her school held a summer program. They took the kids out to the suburbs for a cultural exchange day. Real clean pool, real clean neighborhood. But none of the black girls swam. They stood to the side, holding towels and shame. Lucille slipped when she was helping another girl off the edge. Fell in. Nobody jumped in after her." Shaq's throat tightened. "What happened?" She clawed her way out. "She said it wasn't the water that almost took her. It was the silence, afterward. No one talked about it. No report. No apology. No explanation. They drove back like it hadn't happened. And she said that day, she realized what being invisible really meant." Shawnee turned toward him. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "She never told you that story. Because she thought you were strong enough not to need it. But she told me because she wanted me to know. Even giants drown when no one speaks their name." Shaq stared at the floor, the pool, the scream, Darnell's name, the folded blanket, the glass lobby where sympathy smiled like security. All of it crashed in his mind like waves slamming into stone. "She almost drowned," he said quietly. "And now this girl, she's about to be swallowed the same way." Shawnee nodded. "So maybe you don't need to fix everything. But you can hold her name above water. You can refuse to let them carry her off without remembering who she is. You can be the one who says not again." The room went still again. But this time the quiet felt different. Not like waiting. More like bracing. Shaq stood. Slowly. Steadily. The exhaustion in his limbs hadn't vanished. But it had a new partner, resolve. Lucille had survived that day not because someone saved her, but because she refused to disappear. That girl, too, had screamed to stay visible. And now it was his turn to make sure the world saw her. "No one else drowns in my water," he said. Shawnee looked at him, fire reflecting back in her eyes. The same fire he'd seen in the girl. The same fire Lucille had carried all her life. "You better make waves then," she said. He nodded once, and walked toward the storm. The sun was high again, too bright, too clean, too much like the day everything cracked open. But this time Shaq wasn't walking in quietly. He arrived with cameras already waiting, microphones already extended, protesters pressed behind orange barriers, holding signs painted in urgency. "Truth doesn't float. Justice for Darnell," she screamed for a reason. The air buzzed with that specific electricity you only feel when something is about to tip. A building kind of tension, sharp and necessary, like the moment before a storm finally lets loose. Shaq's SUV rolled to a stop across from the main gate of Everland Park Pool. The place looked the same, but it felt like something else now. Not a public amenity, but a stage. The tiled mural still smiled in pastel perfection on the back wall, kids of all colors leaping into sapphire waves. It mocked him now, like a still photograph trying to silence a scream. News vans lined the street. Cops in neon vests paced the perimeter. Families peeked out from the sidelines, half curious, half nervous. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about what lived beneath it. The mayor stood under a canopy, hands folded, eyes shaded by sunglasses, flanked by city council members and Wiley. Clipboard gone, but that same calculated stiffness coiled inside his shoulders. They'd invited him here under the headline of reconciliation. A ceremonial swim, they said. To show unity, they said. To remind the community that this is a safe space again. Safe for who, though? Shaq stepped out, tall and steady. His presence turned heads. The crowd buzzed. Kids clutched their parents. A few journalists raised cameras, flashbulbs popping like soft lightning. He ignored them. He was scanning for someone else. Then he saw her. She sat in the back of a city cruiser, parked just off to the side. The window was halfway down. The blanket, washed now, but still fraying at the edges, was clutched in her lap. Her eyes locked onto his. No fear this time. No question. Just watching, waiting to see which man he was going to be. A staffer approached him with a robe and a towel, smiling too hard. "Mr. O'Neal, we'll escort you to the changing area. We'll give you a brief moment, and then when you step to the edge of the pool, we'll cue the anthem. Then the mayor will say a few." Shaq didn't take the towel. He didn't blink. "Not swimming today." The staffer blinked. "Sir? I said I'm not getting in that water." The voice wasn't angry. It was anchored. Behind him, cameras snapped into readiness. A few protesters started to cheer. Confusion flickered across Wiley's face. The mayor took a single step forward, smoothing her blazer.
Mr. O'Neal, she called, voice amplified by her nearby mic.
"We want to thank you for your support of this facility and your presence here today. Let's remind our community what unity looks like. If you'd do the honors." Shaq stepped forward, toward the podium, not toward the pool. The swim wasn't happening. He had something else to do. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a manila folder. Thick, taped at the corners. He held it in one hand and the mic in the other. "I didn't come here to swim," he said. "I came to speak." The murmur grew. Cameras zoomed. The mayor tried to interject, but he raised a hand. "I helped build this place because I believed in the idea that spaces could be for everyone. But you can't just paint a mural and call it inclusion. You can't just host free swim days and say the job is done. Because this pool, this very one, took something from us, and the community has been told to smile and move on." He opened the folder and held up a document, an official city report. "This is the incident report from the drowning of a 14-year-old boy named Darnell Harris. It's labeled accidental, but it leaves out that Darnell was bullied, that he was pushed, that the lifeguard hesitated, that a witness, a young black girl, tried to tell the truth and was silenced." Gasps. Movement. Wiley's face tightened. "She screamed the truth right here. In public. She said the water wasn't safe. And what did this city do? You put her in a cruiser. Called it protection. Called it care. But what you really did was hide her away like you did with Darnell's story." He dropped the folder onto the podium. It landed with a heavy thud. You can't wash blood with chlorine. You can't drown truth just because it makes people uncomfortable. He turned toward the cruiser. "She told me not to get in the water. And I didn't. I listened. Now it's time everyone else does too." A moment of stillness fell, not quiet, but charge. Like air before thunder. The mayor stepped toward him, eyes still poised. "Mr. O'Neal, we understand your concern, but let's not create a narrative that undermines the healing this pool represents." Shaq looked at her. "You don't get to define healing if you don't admit the wound." Then, without ceremony, he stepped down, not toward the water, toward the girl. The officer beside the cruiser stiffened, unsure what to do. But Shaq didn't ask permission. He simply nodded at the girl. She opened the door and stepped out, slowly, not trembling, not hiding, just seeing. He handed her the folder. And in front of every camera he stood beside her, She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her scream had already rewritten the story, and now the world was listening. They came for him fast. Not with police cars or angry mobs. That would have been too obvious, too easy to rally against. Instead, they came through phone calls and closed-door meetings. They came in the form of polished executives, with clipped tones, who started their messages with "We appreciate all you've done," and ended them with "We're going in a different direction." Within 72 hours of the press conference, two major brands quietly severed ties. A sneaker deal paused, pending review. One network host praised his moral courage while another called him reckless and racially divisive. Comments flooded every channel, some calling him a hero for standing by the girl, others accusing him of weaponizing tragedy and bringing race into something that should have stayed about community. But Shaq, he didn't flinch. Not this time. Because while corporations scrambled to maintain neutrality, something real had finally started to move. The girl was free. No more protective hold. No more forced silence dressed as psychiatric concern. She had been released quietly. No press release. No apology. Just a digital vanishing act. But Shaq made sure that vanishing didn't stick. The video of her emerging from the cruiser, barefoot, blanket clutched in one hand, folder in the other, had gone viral, not because of him, but because people recognized something raw in her eyes. She wasn't a victim in the frame. She was a witness, and now she had backup. A black-led civil rights law firm out of Atlanta reached out the same day. They moved fast. Opened a pro bono file. Brought in an investigative team. Subpoenaed the pool's security footage. The original drowning report. Wiley's internal communications. And then, they found what Shaq knew had to be there. A name. Darnell Harris. Not just a footnote in a forgotten report. A boy with a life that didn't end in the water, but in the silence that followed it. The lawyers found the aunt who had signed the settlement. Tracked her to Alabama. She'd never wanted the money, she said. She just didn't know how to fight the system. They offered her a new way. She said yes. The mayor's office tried to get ahead of it. "We regret any oversight," they said in a press conference that danced around every key fact like it was a live wire. Wiley was placed on administrative leave. The pool was shut down for maintenance. An independent inquiry was launched, though no one could say who exactly was leading it. But something had changed. Because people were talking now. Not just activists or lawyers. Parents, teachers, teens who had been at the pool that day, and were finally ready to say, "Yeah, we heard the jokes. We saw the push. We knew it wasn't an accident." And in the middle of it all, Shaq stood quiet. Not in retreat. In witness. He didn't do more interviews. He didn't launch a PR campaign. He let the truth take up its own space. He'd always known power. The kind that came with fame. Endorsements, legacy. But this was a different kind of power. Not the kind that fills arenas, but the kind that flips the lights on when a stage has been faked. The kind that burns through rehearsed lines and forces people to reckon with the script and the cost. He paid it willingly. Because for the first time in a long time, the noise around his name wasn't just about stats, or sneakers, or late-night talk show laughs. It was about what he refused to be silent about. He met with the girl again. This time in a lawyer's office. She sat in a real chair, not the floor. She wore clean clothes. Hair combed. Still guarded. Still small, but not erased. She didn't say much. Just handed him a drawing. It was of a pool. Shallow end. Deep end. A small figure standing at the edge. Blanket around her shoulders. Another figure. Big, tall. Standing beside her. Not in the water. Just watching. Holding space. She didn't need to explain it. Shaq took the drawing home and framed it. That same week, a grassroots coalition began drafting a proposal for a community-led oversight board to monitor city-run youth facilities. It wasn't flashy, it didn't trend, but it was real. The conversations were shifting. The ground was starting to tilt. Justice, Shaq realized, doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts in the places people want to pretend are peaceful. The still pools, the quiet lobbies, the painted murals that speak over the buried screams. But screams don't echo in water. They vanish, unless someone pulls them back to the surface. He didn't need applause. He didn't need forgiveness. He only needed to know that the next time a child screams, "Don't get in the pool," the world wouldn't just hear it. They'd listen. It didn't look like a victory. Not at first. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. No news vans with glossy microphones. No politicians crowding a podium under a white tent. Just early morning light, stretching long across a construction site that had finally turned into a sanctuary. No fanfare, no confetti, just a single engraved sign placed gently near the gate. Black letters on brushed steel, clean and unpretentious. The kind of sign that didn't scream legacy. It just held it. Shaq stood still at the entrance, staring at the letters like they'd just been carved into his ribs. It had taken months, funding fights, zoning pushback, layers of red tape thicker than steel. Not because the idea was radical, but because the truth still made people uncomfortable. A center built for them by them, with them in control. A pool designed not just to be accessible, but accountable. This time, the lifeguards weren't teenagers picked out of summer job fairs. They were trained, certified, and from the community. Uniforms stitched with not just a name, but purpose. The staff wasn't just diverse on paper. They lived on the same blocks, knew the kids by name, brought juice boxes from their own homes when budgets got tight. There were no marble sculptures, no press kits, but the energy buzzed different. Because here, every inch of tile, every steel bench, every lane line had been earned, not donated to earn favor, but fought for to tell a buried story out loud. Shaq walked the perimeter slowly, his frame still massive, but his pace unhurried. He wasn't just checking details, he was feeling it. The water, not yet filled for its public opening, sat in gleaming anticipation. A still surface, a perfect mirror. But this time, the stillness didn't haunt him. Because this time, the truth lived here. Kids ran past him, kids who would have been told to quiet down in other neighborhoods, who now raced freely through halls painted with murals that didn't just show smiling faces, but told stories. Darnell's story, the girl's story. Murals that screamed back in color, what the world once tried to drown. A woman with a clipboard, a black woman in sneakers and a gold chain, waved at him. "You're early." Shaq grinned. Didn't want to miss the calm before the storm. She smiled knowingly. "You're the reason this storm exists." He didn't respond, just gave a small nod, and kept walking. Out back, a covered patio overlooked the water. A plaque embedded in the brick read, "In memory of Darnell Harris, whose life mattered before they believed it." Shaq sat on the bench beneath it. For a moment he closed his eyes, let the wind move across his skin like a quiet voice he'd once missed. He didn't need anyone to speak. The silence here wasn't the old kind, not the silence that buried things. This was new. This was stillness earned, protected, honest. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag. Folded inside the cover was a photo, one he'd kept since the meeting at the lawyer's office. The drawing the girl had given him. The one with the pool, the blanket, and the man who didn't jump in but stood beside her. She had drawn it before any of this existed. Before the hearings, before the headlines, before the shift, and now she was speaking to Congress. It hadn't happened in some grand chamber. It had happened in a smaller hearing room, tucked between bureaucratic offices and polished silence. She wore a navy dress, no blanket, hair pressed, voice clear. Her words didn't crack or flinch. She told them about Darnell, about the pool, about the laughter that led to a push, about how no one had listened until one man refused to swim. They didn't interrupt her. Not once. Because truth does something to a room when it's given shape by someone who's lived it. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for change. For mandatory trauma response training for public pool staff. For real-time incident protocols. For children's witness statements to carry legal weight. For city records to be publicized, not buried in bureaucratic footnotes. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She spoke. And when she finished, the room was quiet in the best way. The kind that says something just shifted here. Shaq didn't attend the hearing, not because he wasn't proud, but because it wasn't his moment. He watched from the break room of the news center, surrounded by staff, the sound low, but the pride thick in the air. One of the younger lifeguards, maybe 17, turned to him. "She's the reason I applied," he said. "Not even to be a lifeguard, just to be part of this." Shaq just nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. Back in the present, a small girl ran up to him on the patio, holding a juice box in one hand, and her goggles in the other. "Are you Shaq?" He smiled. "Some days, yeah. Did you used to play basketball?" "A little," she grinned. "You gonna swim today?" He looked out at the pool, the surface still, but this time, not a secret. This time the stillness was earned, built on witness, on names spoken, on screams that were finally heard. He shook his head gently. Nah, I'm just here to watch. She nodded like she understood, then ran off, goggles swinging from her fingers. And he sat there, hands resting on his knees, watching the sunlight stretch across the water, still, but never silent, because still water isn't peace. It's just quiet before someone brave decides to dive in. If this story moved you, don't let it end at the credits. Share it where silence usually wins. Speak names they tried to bury. Ask what's beneath the surface, in your schools, your parks, your city halls. Because truth doesn't rise on its own. Someone has to pull it up, and maybe that someone is you.